Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're just going to give it about a minute while we let the people start joining in, and then we're going to get started. So we'll be talking very shortly.
Okay.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Introduction to Jenkins X, a hands-on demonstration for securing your Jenkins X cluster. This is part one. So before we get started, just a couple of things up top. We are recording. You will be able to view this later on if you end up missing part of it, or maybe you have a colleague who's unable to join for all of it. We are also able to take questions. As soon as you think of one, please go right ahead and ask. We'll have time at the end. At the very end, there will also be a very short survey. A link will pop up just asking what you thought, what you'd like to learn more about. But in the meantime, I don't want to take up too much more of our time. So we have two presenters today. I'd like to introduce the first one for you. He works with Jenkins X here on the team, and his name is Cosmin. Cosmin, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, let's start, everyone. We have this agenda for today. We will start first to discuss a bit how we need to secure our, let's say, cloud resources and manage Kubernetes cluster. And then we will dig down into the Jenkins X installation, and which is our recommendation to install Jenkins X in a more secured way. And then we will have a nice demo at the end to show how you can consume secrets from Vault in your application. So let's discuss about the first point. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that Jenkins X is usually installed in a cloud environment, and we need to follow standard cloud security guidelines. And to begin with, we should probably isolate our cloud resources created by Jenkins X, this including the managed Kubernetes cluster and a bunch of other resources like buckets, cloud DNS resources, and so on. And usually here, if you are on Google Cloud, the recommendation is to create a dedicated project for this. If you are in other cloud like AWS or Amazon, there are slightly small differences. For instance, in Azure, you can create the resource group where you group everything and so on. But ideally is to try to reduce the whole surface where Jenkins X is installed and isolate it from your production systems and so on. So after we have this setup ready, so we have a dedicated project, let's say in Google Cloud, then we can create a Kubernetes GKE cluster, for instance. And a good recommendation is first to have a look at this cluster, because not always the default config is the most secured one. And in order to do this, you have a few options. Either you can do it manually, or we have a nice command, it's called gx-scan cluster, which can scan an entire Kubernetes cluster using an open source tool. It's called KubeHunter, and it's checking the default config of the cluster, and then it prints out a number of recommendations or, let's say, findings. And I can switch to my terminal to show this in action. Quickly, I have a default GKE cluster, which was created. And basically, there's nothing installed into it. So we can run this command. It takes about 1 minute usually. It will start this KubeHunter inside of the cluster and run a number of checks. This KubeHunter is executed as a Kubernetes job, and then it will collect a report at the end. because I haven't specified any report output format, like let's say YAML and so on, it will just print it out. And we see here, there is something here
Can
already.
we increase the, Cosmin, can we increase the text size so that we can all see it? Because I think it's pretty small.
Yeah. Do you see something better now? Okay, perfect. So first, the tool just reports the kind of infrastructure, underlying infrastructure. We still have a cluster with 3 nodes. Then it checks which services are enabled. These are standard Kubernetes services like kubelet API, API server, and so on. And then it runs a number of checks against these services and then print out the findings. Because I maximize my screen right now, it's a bit, the text is not well aligned, so it doesn't look well, but
So I have a couple of questions, Cosmin. Can this be scheduled? Like, say someone wants to continuously scan their cluster, they should be able to schedule it, right? Whether you use this GX command or not, you can technically do that at the Kubernetes cluster level.
Exactly. So technically you can schedule it. It's just a job. So GX scan cluster, it creates on demand, basically a Kubernetes job. And we just use a kube hunter Docker container inside of this job. It's executed and then it prints out the outputs. Basically, we collect this output and then we just format the output in a nice way. But the idea was to somehow follow good DevOps sec practices where you continuously scan your cluster and you see if something is changed in terms of config, it's someone exposing your cluster and so on. So you can definitely run it as a job and get continuous reports back.
Yeah, that would be ideal, I think, right? Because it always will run in the background while you're still doing CI/CD in the cluster and whatnot. So
exactly, but it's also a good stuff just to run it first time before installing anything into your cluster, just to see, okay, what's inside.
Yeah.
And it's good to see, okay, for instance, here we have a bunch of things which, I don't know, we probably want to secure them. For instance, this one, the service account is available to all pods inside of them. I'm not sure if we want to make it more secure, depends of the requirements, depends of what we have. But you can basically customize. So we can, I stop sharing my terminal, I share my,
So this is interesting because one of the things I saw on the output of that command to scan the cluster, it seems like we can use some pod policies to remedy some of the things that came out of the.
Exactly, yes. We can, yes, define additional security policies like pod security policies, network policies, and so on to isolate better our cluster if we need.
Yep.
Usually they are part of the installation of the resources later on.
Yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to distinguish for users is like you're doing this aside from the installation of Jenkins X. In other words, in the Kubernetes cluster, you're setting policies for pods and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can also go like, let's say we go on our cluster. I just go in the terminal. So I just take one, let's say one of our clusters. Let's say I have this one. You can turn on additional flags, basically. You see there are a number of things are disabled here. So if you need more security, you just go either using the CLI or ideally using Terraform.
Right.
You can turn on flags on and off to have a more secured cluster. But it might be that if you tight up too much the cluster, then you have later on problems with the installation of Jenkins X, maybe, or other, let's say, Helm charts you want to install. Maybe they expect some stuff, maybe it's turned off and so on. A good thing to enable is this workload identity. We started to use that is to, for instance, provision service accounts inside of the pod, like on demand over annotations and stuff like that if you need. For instance, you have your pods accessing buckets or something like that, and you need a dedicated service account with a limited set of permissions, then you can enable workload identity to just allocate dedicated focused service accounts with reduced permissions, which, for instance, are able just to read from buckets instead of doing a lot of stuff in your cloud project. And yeah, as I said, we use this. You can go on GitHub. There is this Kube Hunter tool, and it's kind of customizable. You can turn on and off some stuff, so you can just look here and so on. So
and then of course, I think folks should know that they can run any other tool out there to scan their cluster, their Kubernetes.
Exactly. So
we're not saying you should use this tool. You can use whatever you want.
Exactly. You can use any tool you want, basically. It's just a recommendation. It's a good way to make sure that your cluster, it's kind of following secured configuration guidelines, let's say. There are also kind of tools or, let's say, set of, I don't know, checks you can run to see that your cluster is compliant from security perspective. So there are a lot of tooling around this right now.
Right.
Depends. Everyone has its own tool set, but it's just a recommendation. So that is good to follow.
Yep.
Okay. So maybe now we can start to look into Jenkins X installation. Maybe we can switch to you, Oscar, to show the requirements file and how we enable various security features inside of Jenkins X.
Right. Yeah. So let me go ahead and share here my screen. And I'll start talking about things. Are you able to see my screen? Should be able to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do, thanks for the cluster level security awareness stuff, Cosmin. Now what I want to do is talk about some things you can do at the Jenkins X installation and configuration level, right? So one of the things that I have here, I have a cluster in my GKE environment. So, and I have installed Jenkins X using JX boot, right? So I'll show you what I have here. So this is what I have. And if you have not heard of JX boot, we'll walk through some fundamental stuff now as it relates to enabling custom domain and all that stuff, because that's on our agenda. But just know that I am using the distribution for this demonstration, right? So in these scenarios that I'll walk you through today, will be also in the context of deploying a REST API application that's packaged as Helm, of course, and it has dependencies, mainly MongoDB. And we will retrieve secrets from Vault, and I'll show you what the Helm chart looks like. I will also give you a link to the repository at the end, so you can have that and take a look at it on your own time, okay? So for now, let's take a look at how I enabled custom domain and TLS on my cluster, right? So what I'll do is, I got a lot going on here, but I have here on my terminal, the first thing you can do is when you execute JX get URLs, that will give you the end result in my case, because I already did it, but I'll walk you through the way I did it, is you'll end up with all of these built-in endpoints using TLS and the custom domain that you see here, right? And we'll talk about the deployed applications in a bit, but I won't go into that right now. So let's take a look at how I configured the TLS and the custom domain. So in JX boot, you'll always manage your configuration and in a repository, which also, you know, we follow the GitOps principles. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the repository I'm in is called Cloudbees Jenkins X boot config. This is the repository that has all of the version of all dependencies, all the stuff that Jenkins X requires to operate in that cluster, right? And so whenever you want to make a change to your configuration, we talked about this, by the way, in our first one of our first sessions, but just going briefly over it. You make your changes in this requirements file here on the left, and then it triggers a pipeline to make the changes and whatnot at the cluster level. So in the case of enabling TLS and the custom domain, you can see right here in my ingress, I'll just highlight it here. Right, you can see I've enabled the custom domain. So I just gave it the domain. I actually did not add this. This was added after I executed at this root level of this directory in the JX boot. I executed this command, right? So when I wanted to enable the domain, I filled this in. I say, yes, use the external DNS. And I added a dot here, as you can see in the subdomain. The reason I did that is because I end up with the URLs that look like this, see? That's what the dot does. So it's just a preference. For me, it's a cleaner URL. And so I enabled the TLS, like I said, and then ran JX boot. At that point, it started doing its thing, and it did a pull request in the dev repository. Now, here's something that many people ask, right? What is this JX boot config like directory and repository? So if I do git remote v, you will notice that there are several remotes configured for this, right? So this is actually my cluster. In my cluster, if I go to this is actually the direct repo where resides in my GitHub organization and where all the configuration for the cluster is located, right? So I will go to my organization here just to show you. Now, one of the things you might have missed in your config or when you got started is that you need to create a GitHub organization, and you need to also create a bot account. You see how I have two things that you might have missed. And that's important when you can install Jenkins X, because the bot account has the proper rights in the GitHub organization to execute things like, creating repositories and running, of course, PRs and all that stuff. So just be aware of that. Going back.
Also, just to add to this, if you want to use ChatOps, kind of recommended to have this bot account. Otherwise, you cannot comment on your own PRs.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And what Cosmin is saying, the ChatOps is if previous PRs, I'll show you what he means. Is like when you make a change in your application, and we'll see that in action shortly. Here's the bot, right? It created. It commented on the PR, and it says, hey, your preview environment is available to view your changes. And so you can see the chat up in actions here. And of course, that's all enabled because I created that bot account, right? So just keep that in mind. But going back to where all of our configuration for this cluster is, it will always be in a repository called -dev, right? So it's actually, this is the name of my cluster, Whiskey Sour. So here's the dev, here's the staging environment, here's production. And in that, all of the configuration, including TLS and everything, is kept in their version control. So if I go into environment as well, I can see a whole bunch of applications or resources that are deployed as part of the installation. One thing I like to mention is when you deploy a application, it is actually also, I deployed the UI, so it's actually added as a requirement there. And that's how you know what you've deployed as well, in case you ever wondered. So now that you have an idea of how to enable TLS, it is pretty much you go into the ingress section of that requirements file, fill it in, and make sure, in my case, I actually had a cloud DNS entry for this. So the SharePointOscar.com domain is not a Google domain. And no one expects you to only have Google domains, right? I bought it somewhere else. I have a provider, I manage it. what I actually ended up doing is creating NS entry to point to the Google servers in Cloud DNS. So I created, just to show you briefly here, I'm going to go into that area so you can see that entry. I think a lot of people were asking about how to do that without Google domains, right? So let's see. Network Cloud DNS. Here it is, right? So I created a zone, a Cloud DNS zone, and that zone has a whole bunch of entries that get added automatically when I'm publishing things, including the internal endpoints of, or built-in endpoints for applications that are part of like Chart Museum and whatnot, as well as the applications that I deploy, right? So you can see entries for my CARS REST API here, which I'll show you briefly. So just keep that in mind. You'll want to create one of these zone entries to be able to then delegate to the Cloud DNS and let it know ultimately it can create entries, and those are when you do NS lookup, they're actually able to be looked up.
I think we have some docs on GX docs pointing out how you should set up the Cloud DNS. You search on, maybe it's worth showing the doc. There are some steps how you go through and how you set up the Cloud DNS.
Yeah,
if you don't have it, yeah, if someone needs that, you just go on the GX docs and search for Cloud DNS or something like that, and you should find it quite quickly, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll answer any questions about how to enable TLS and all that, but that kind of gives you an overview of what I did, right? So ultimately, like I said, if you do get URLs, once you enable it, you will see all of your endpoints have the custom domain being used. All of your applications that you deploy will have the custom domain used as well. Now, there is one thing I'd like to highlight, and if I say JX get applications, you will notice one thing, that this is not using TLS, these applications that I deployed. And Cosmin tells me that there's actually an open issue to address that, because technically, if I wanted to enable that in my staging environment, I would just fill this in. But even if I did that now and showed you, it will not work because of that open outstanding issue. Is that correct, Cosmin?
Yeah, that's right. So there are some workarounds and some options, but it's still, let's say, an ongoing work to fix this. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, right now it works pretty well for dev environment, which is the Jenkins X installation. For application staging and production, if they are deployed in the same cluster and you need to reuse the same site manager, you need to do some extra configuration.
Okay. So there's a question now, why is the JX UI HTTP rather than HTTPS? I think that kind of answers that, right? It's like there's, we have to do some additional work to secure the UI via TLS, right?
I think by default, we don't expose the UI. Usually the HTTP endpoint is disabled, so we don't create any ingresses. If you add the UI with the
the UI is actually exposed, because if I go here, I can hit the UI. It's
it shouldn't be usually, but I don't know why. Normally it's not exposed, and then you have a GX UI command which does a kubectl proxy into the UI service, and then you just have a local port forward, and then you can open the UI.
Yeah.
So usually we have also support for HTTPS and SSO on the UI, but by default right now it's disabled because it requires extra configuration, and we want to make life easier for users just to try the UI.
So I think, Cosmin, you bring up a good point. And just to clarify for users, the UI right now in my case is exposed. It doesn't mean I can leave it exposed. I can actually remove the ingress entry for my UI, and it will not be public. But I think it's good for people to know that in the session 2 of our security, we will show how you can actually use SSO to enable SSO for this particular endpoint so that you can then use your domain credentials to access it, right? So we'll be showing that in our system too. Yeah, yeah. So going back to our, let's see, I think there was, I want to make sure I answered that. Yeah, we answered that. Okay. So now I'm going to show you, I think we had in our agenda, let's talk about the REST API, right? So there's a lot to go over there. Here's a fictitious application. Let me show you the structure here. And this is what it looks like, right? So I created this a while back ago. I just basically imported it into Jenkins X, and it created the charts, the preview and the REST API one here. And then I tailored it to retrieve secrets from Vault. So first, let me show you, in case you haven't done this, in Jenkins X, there's actually always more than one way of doing things. To get the secrets, since my CloudBees distribution, version 5, by the way, is using Vault, I can say JX get secrets, and just through the JX binary, I can get a list of secrets available to me, right? I don't actually use that for this purpose. I use the little utility safe, like it's the open source one, which I prefer. But you can see that the secret that I created in Vault for our demo today is this one here, MongoDB, right? And one thing I'll do is I'll actually just do, I think I can say JX, here, I have it in my notes. I have bad memory, so I can't keep, I'm like Victor, I don't remember things easily. So give me a second. Yeah, so I like to do this here because it works just to set my terminal here. So let's say you wanted to get the Vault configuration and then just list out the environment variables with Vault. I like doing that. And we also get a key, right? So I want to show you how to access the Vault UI. So I'm going to grab this key and click on my endpoint at this point. And so I'm going to authenticate using that token that I just got. Now notice that you can enable LDAP, Okta even. I've used Okta before, even GitHub Authentication. Pretty sure in your environment, they'll pick that out for you. But in this case, it's just a token that was issued by Vault. So I will sign in using that. Ooh. Oh, that's weird. Let's try it again. Let's reissue it. I might have copied an extra character or a space, but let's just make sure. So I'll start this way. Okay. Oh, wow. It's not letting me authenticate. That's weird. Okay. In any case, that secret is actually there because we just listed it here. So what I will do is show you the chart, how I adapted it to pull that secret in the chart at the time of deploying it. So the first file I want to show you is the values file. So let's just go back up here. Here's the first portion of the values file that I modified. So I created under the environment these entries. So these map, as you can see, the Vault secret has this key, and of course the root password key for Mongo. Further down, I configured the Mongo dependency and I aliased it using cars REST API DB. And I said, yeah, it's enabled. And by the way, I want to use password authentication. So at that point, when you enable that, you must provide credentials to access Mongo. Then on the chart itself, and again, this is actually just the MongoDB chart configuration, but I'm passing the Vault credentials or the Vault secret right at the time that Mongo will be spun up for the first time. So this is what makes things happen, right here. And the other portion, you can see the root password is also configured. I configured actually disabled persistence for testing, but this is all part of the regular stable Mongo chart configuration you can pull from GitHub, right? I haven't done anything special there. My requirements on my app chart list out Mongo and I alias it, right? And you can see that I pick the version of Mongo I want to use. All of that is in place. And I say, yep, enable it. So this means that when I deploy, here's my deployment for my app chart. I have a front end. So I have the Node.js REST API, which is this folder here. And it has a whole bunch of controllers and services, models. You see a car. We'll actually see it here. I'll just go to it real quick. Here's my REST API, right? So it actually has a front end, right? I just wanted to show you it responds, right? And ultimately using Postman, I can make a call to that API. I was playing around with it last night. So if I go on Postman and do a quick get, now notice how this is local, but my endpoint is exposed. So I'm going to copy the URL of my API and just modify this entry here. And I'm actually just going to get the cars. So I'm going to say car. There it is, right? So it's deployed. You can see there are 2 entries for the cars there. So it's live. I'm able to perform CRUD operations there on the API. So going back to the structure here, my deployment calls for 2 containers, right? The Node.js API, and then also the Mongo charts, which are dependencies. So in my deployment, I need to pass the Mongo host and the credentials as well. So I'll close this out. And you see how I start building out my Mongo URI by using the values that I set as environment on the chart, which in return come from Vault, right? So everything is set from Vault. I also set a whole bunch of other environment variables that my Node.js API needs. So I set those there. And that's how I know that when it gets initialized, all of the credentials work, right? Again, this will be available. It's actually already available. So I'll put the link on the chat here. Let me just do this. And you can grab it from the GitHub URL here. So I'll paste it so you can further take a look in your own time. So let's see, can I paste it somewhere here in the chat? We'll have Max paste it here for you. I'm not sure how to paste it. In any case, that is the demonstration for showing you how to get those secrets from Vault for your full stack application. We'll open it up for questions now.
Just wanted to mention something. If you go back in the GS requirements, because we mentioned about this organization and so on, maybe some people, they want to put their environments repositories on a private Git repository and not publicly exposed. So if this is possible, we just need to set this environment Git public to false. But in order to be able to do this, you need an organization. So you cannot do it with just a GitHub user.
Yep. So this is the GitHub organization in my case, and I told Jenkins X to make the repositories public in my case so that people have access. But switching this to false will basically make them all private?
I think, yeah, this is probably the defaults. Private is probably the default config for many enterprises, which they don't want to. And I think this is also good because inside of the dev environment, we have a number of cloud resources, like cloud resources names and stuff like that, which are exposed. So it's better to keep it private from security standpoint, that you don't expose any, let's say, infrastructure information.
Yeah, of course. Yep. Okay. So let's see if we can answer any questions on what people saw today, and happy to answer those. And also, if you have topic ideas for subsequent sessions, we want to know, because I'll drive our other sessions based on what you want to see. So.
All right, we'll give everyone a minute to start putting their questions in. There was one that came in the chat that I think would be worth just mentioning real quick live on the air, which is, I don't remember the exact context from this one, but does that only work if the DNS is in the same project?
No, I think in the DNS, like cloud DNS, works for multiple projects, right? You can use it throughout different projects in GCP, right, Cosmin?
Yes, you can configure external DNS to use a different project if you need. We don't do that by default. It's just for simplicity, because you have one project usually allocated for entire Jenkins X installation. So we reuse that project also for cloud DNS. But yeah, you can use another project. Usually you just need to create this NS record to delegate into your domain, usually in the same project. So you don't need to have the cloud, let's say the cloud DNS resource allocated in that project. So you can, what we have done in the past, we have a dedicated project where we have the A records, or we have more DNS resources, and then we delegate from other projects into these projects. Yeah.
So I actually missed one item that I want to cover before we continue getting questions, by the way. It's enabling basic authentication for one of your applications that you deploy. I forgot about that one. So here's another application I deployed real quick. And the way I enable basic authentication is in the, let's see, in the values of my application. Let's see, in the service. So let me close this out. All I have to do, so there's, I should explain this. There's by default, any application you deploy with Jenkins X, it uses a custom exposed controller, and these are the annotations for it, right? So this is why you don't have to do it manually, expose the application manually. We do it for you. So with this annotation here, we enabled basic authentication on the controller. As you can see, basic auth is enabled, and we use the built-in secret JX basic auth. So any application automatically gets exposed using that. That's what enables me to go over here into this application URL, as you can see, and the basic auth pops up. Now here I can type the same credentials as what that secret has, because at the time I installed it, I said, yeah, use this secret for this basic auth, right? And so that's how I'm able to get into the application. Again, this is just simple stuff. I think in the next session we'll show SSO, which to me is more interesting. But in case you ever need to, yeah, go ahead, Cosmin.
We set up the basic auth for all exposed services. So if you, for instance, open back, it has this admin basic auth password. Right now, we use the same password everywhere for simplicity. Ideally, we should have one password per service to avoid leaking these passwords.
Right.
And let's say if a password gets leaked for one service, then all other services are compromised.
Yep.
That's,
yep. So again, we just wanted to show you how to expose or use, change the annotations of your app if you wanted to enable basic authentication, right? So we'll continue with the questions. Let's see. We have one from Steven. how do your teams use JX securely? Does anyone use the JX CLI or RBAC for Vault? So I guess the question is, how do you constrain users from using, say, Vault, and like anyone access Vault?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Right now for GXCLI, we control the permissions over the cloud permission model. So let's say on Google Cloud, you can allocate your custom group with a custom permission set, and then you can allocate your, let's say, devs to that group, or you can have multiple groups, and then you just use G-Cloud or something like that to set it up for the Kubernetes, and then we use that. For Vault right now, by default, we don't set up additional auth methods. Is it possible, of course, to enable additional auth methods like Google Cloud? You can enable Google Cloud and use the same, let's say, user model you have in Google identity provider, also for Vault. Also, we don't add additional policies because inside of Vault, you can split, let's say, the paths to the secrets based on policy, based on user identities. Right now, we don't do that. So, and the whole access to Vault is just based on a Kubernetes service account and was meant to be used only by the admin, which is adding secrets inside. And then later on is used just within the cluster nodes. But that's a good point. So we have some outstanding issues to extend this Vault security and enable additional auth methods and policies.
I think also it's good to know, we plan on doing this, is that we're going to publish a guide on using Vault with Jenkins X, because you can have another instance of Vault doing, retrieving secrets, managing who has access to it. Like Cosmin said, the instance of Vault that comes with the installation is meant for, I guess, for a specific purpose, right, Cosmin? You can use separate instances to do other things.
Exactly. So initially was meant to just store Jenkins X related secrets.
Right.
So everything what is in Jenkins X installation. But yeah, we started to use it also for applications, and ideally we should split this and use different policies, different access policies, and so on. Right now, we don't configure that. Hopefully we will do that.
So we'll have a guide eventually to help people understand what they can do, using other instances of Vault to get secrets, manage secrets and all that for their apps, and use RBAC to control who has access to it and all that. But that's we're working on that, figure that out. So, all right, we have another one here from Carmen. Where they're using JX at the company. What if you have your own DNS secret? The cloud DNS secret name assumes you are using the certified manager that JX installs. I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So we install basically everything. So the external DNS and also the cloud DNS secret. By default with Jenkins X. And I think the main reason is that we want to keep version compatibility. So we want to lock down the external DNS version. So we have a kind of a version stream where we lock down the whole components versions, and then we use the same component. But of course, you can tweak the boot to use your own cloud DNS, your own external DNS and your own secret if you want. But then you need to know what you are doing basically, because you are on your own.
Yeah, but they should be able to do it. So I'm looking at my screen, Cosmin, they would change line 49, right?
Exactly, yeah. You can use a different secret, but this is just a GCP service account, which is used by external DNS to provision records into cloud DNS, because external DNS needs authentication with the cloud provider. So this is used for GCP.
Yeah. So I see what you're saying.
As far as I know, there is all that can be completely disabled, and then you just set up whatever you have as a way to manage your TLS. So I guess that's a general philosophy. Jenkins X comes with certain defaults that are the way how we prefer to do stuff, and you're free to disable any of those and just roll out your own.
Okay. Now, Eric Tavella mentioned something about performance for future sessions. What do you guys think about that? I wonder, I guess I probably need more detail because everyone's instance is different, right? So I haven't experienced issues with performance, but I don't know. What about you, Victor Cosmin?
It's a complicated topic. I think now with Tekton, because initially we had classic Jenkins and performance was not that good. Now with Tekton, it gets a lot better. Also with Kaniko, if you use Kaniko to build images, there is some caching mechanism. So some layers are cached from Docker images, it gets faster. And depends which services or which languages you use. Let's say if you use Java or you use some Go or something, probably it's a good practice to cache all these artifacts into a local repository. We have by default Nexus installed into the cluster. You can also add something that if you are doing Go, we have additional applications like for Go, module proxy and stuff like that. So there are various layers where you can improve performance by caching and so on.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and he was referring more to at build time. So I think those are pretty good points that you bring up, the caching aspect. Okay.
Hey, Oscar, we do have another question here.
Yes.
What is in the roadmap from a security perspective?
I'll let Cosmin answer that. He has a little more insight.
Yeah, so we have a lot of, let's say, outstanding work items. If you go on the GitHub Jenkins X repository, you search by area, security area / security, probably are like 60 issues open. There are a few bugs. Of course, we have a lot of work to do to improve like the whole secret management, to improve integration into the pipeline. Right now, you can consume secrets using Kubernetes secrets inside of the pipeline, but probably you want to use Vault and more advanced ways to do that. Yeah, there are various areas right now. I cannot really talk from priorities perspective because I don't have right now a clear overview, but definitely you can go on GitHub, see the open issues. If you see something which is like high priority, you can comment on that and we will try to prioritize it in front of other items.
Yep. So that brings up a good point. And I think, before we go, one of the things we're doing in our core group is to figure out the best way to take feedback from you, the community, to enable or develop features, right? And one of the things that we're doing is early February, we're meeting in Spain to talk about this. And I'll keep you all posted via live tweets. I'll be tweeting the different things, but I'll take this into consideration so that we can internally regroup and talk about publishing a roadmap of some sort, high level, but that will help you understand what things are being done and what to look for. I think on the Jenkins X side, we do have a page where we show future features, but I'll have to find it. I know we revamped the site and we're constantly working on it. So I'll look for that and share it later. Okay.
All right. That looks like it's it for the questions for now. Oscar, Cosmin, Victor, any of you have any final thoughts before we go?
Yep. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. I think if you have follow-up questions, please do send those over. I'm always on Twitter. Victor is too. Cosmin is too. And then we appreciate your time. I'll send out the links for the repositories where you can take your time and view how to retrieve these secrets from Vault. And of course, always there on Slack to answer questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And the same. If you have any questions, just reach out on Slack. We try to help. And probably you can also share the devenv link if you have it open. That's a repository that someone can see the requirements and what you have in terms of security enabled into your requirements. I think it's a good guidance.
All right. Thanks, everyone. That survey is about to pop up, asking what we thought we'd like to learn more about, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers, everybody.